He never lost a single battle, not one. From the plains of Greece to the mountains of Afghanistan, his name was a synonym for victory. He toppled the mighty Persian Empire, a superpower that had endured for centuries in less than a decade. By the age of 30, he commanded a kingdom that stretched from the Adriatic Sea to the Indus River, the largest the Western world had ever seen. He was a military genius, a charismatic leader, a man who believed himself to be a god walking among mortals. Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared on the world stage, he was gone. The man who had faced down armies of hundreds of thousands turned his army around. Why? Why did Alexander the Great, the invincible conqueror, suddenly stop? Alexander was born into a world of violence, ambition, and political intrigue. His father was Philip II of Macedon, a brilliant and ruthless king who transformed a backwater kingdom into the dominant military power in Greece. Philip was a master strategist and a relentless innovator, creating the professional Macedonian phalanx that would become the cornerstone of his son's army. His mother, Olympias, was a formidable figure in her own right. She told the young Alexander that his true father was not Philip, but the king of the gods, Zeus himself. He was tutored by the greatest mind of the age, Aristotle, who taught him rhetoric, literature, science, and philosophy. At the age of 16, while his father was away on campaign, Alexander was left in charge of Macedon. 2 years later, at the pivotal Battle of Chaeronea, it was the 18-year-old Alexander who led the decisive cavalry charge, shattering the elite Theban sacred band. Philip's assassination in 336 BC thrust Alexander onto the throne at the age of just 20. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia. He led an army of around 40,000 men, a mix of tough Macedonian veterans and allied Greek soldiers. Upon landing in Asia Minor, Alexander made a dramatic gesture. He visited the ancient city of Troy, where he paid homage to his mythical ancestor Achilles. The Persian Empire, ruled by the great king Darius III, was slow to react. The local satraps underestimated the young Macedonian king. They gathered their forces at the Granicus River, confident they could stop him before he ventured any deeper into Persian territory. Ignoring the advice of his older general Parmenion, Alexander ordered an immediate head-on assault, plunging into the river at the head of his elite companion cavalry. The battle was a chaotic, swirling melee in the riverbed. Alexander himself was nearly killed, saved only by his general, Cletus the Black. But Alexander's audacity paid off. The victory at the Granicus was total, shattering Persian authority in Asia Minor and sending a shockwave across the empire. The great king, Darius III, could no longer ignore the Macedonian threat. He spent months assembling a massive imperial army. The two armies finally met near the town of Issus, on a narrow coastal plain squeezed between the mountains and the sea. In a moment of tactical genius, Alexander led his companion cavalry in a daring charge aimed directly at Darius. The sight of the seemingly possessed Macedonian king was too much for Darius. He panicked and fled. Darius chose his ground carefully for their final confrontation, the wide open plains of Gaugamela, near modern-day Mosul in Iraq. He had assembled the largest army he could muster, including fearsome scythed chariots, a final desperate gamble to save his throne. Alexander's tactical plan is still studied in military academies today. He advanced with his army angled to the right, stretching the Persian line and creating a gap right near Darius. Once again, under the terrifying pressure of Alexander's direct assault, Darius lost his nerve and fled. The Persian Empire was effectively his. Alexander marched triumphantly into Babylon, then moved on to Susa and Persepolis, capturing the immense Persian treasury. In a hugely symbolic act, he ordered the great palace of Persepolis to be burned to the ground. The old empire was dead, and a new one was being born from its ashes. Alexander pursued the fleeing Darius east, embarking on a brutal war in Central Asia that lasted 3 long years. It was during this period that Alexander's behavior began to change. He adopted Persian court ceremony, demanding his officers perform proskynesis, prostrating themselves before the king. In a drunken rage, he murdered Cletus the Black, the very man who had saved his life at Granicus, after Cletus accused him of forgetting his Macedonian roots. The charismatic leader was becoming a distant, unpredictable tyrant, even as he pushed his exhausted army further east, towards the mythical land of India. In 326 BC, having finally pacified Central Asia, Alexander led his army across the formidable Hindu Kush mountains into the Punjab region. One powerful king, Porus, refused to bow. He gathered his army, including a terrifying contingent of war elephants, and prepared to defend his kingdom. For weeks the two armies stared each other down across the swollen Hydaspes river, Porus's elephants arrayed like a living wall to spook the Macedonian horses. Under cover of a fierce thunderstorm, Alexander led a significant portion of his army on a secret march 17 miles upstream, crossing at an unguarded point. The battle was one of the costliest of Alexander's career. The Indian war elephants wreaked havoc, but Alexander's superior tactics ultimately won the day. When the captured Porus was asked how he wished to be treated, he replied simply, "Treat me like a king." Deeply impressed, Alexander did just that, making him an ally. After the victory over Porus, Alexander heard tales of the great Nanda Empire further east, situated on the banks of the mighty Ganges River. For Alexander, this was the final frontier, but his army, for the first time in their long journey, refused to go any further. They had marched and fought for over 8 years, covering more than 11,000 miles. At the banks of the Hyphasis River, the army mutinied. It was not violent, but a passive, stubborn refusal. The soldiers simply stopped. Their spokesman, veteran General Coenus, laid out their feelings. "A noble thing, O king, is to know when to stop." Alexander was enraged. He felt betrayed by the very men who had made his glory possible. He retreated to his tent for 3 days, but they did not relent. Defeated not by an enemy army but by the exhaustion of his own men, a bitter Alexander finally gave the order. They would turn back. Alexander arrived back in Babylon in 323 BC, a changed man. The final years were marked by grand plans but also increasing paranoia and heavy drinking. The death of his closest friend Hephaestion plunged him into a devastating grief from which he never truly recovered. In early June, after a prolonged drinking bout, Alexander fell ill with a raging fever. For 10 days his condition worsened. His soldiers filed silently past his bed to bid him farewell. When his generals asked to whom he was leaving his vast empire, his final words were, "To the strongest." On June 11, 323 BC, at the age of just 32, Alexander the Great was dead. The man who had conquered the world could not conquer his own mortality, so why did it all stop? The answer is that Alexander's ambition outran human endurance. His conquests were halted first by the mutiny of his exhausted army, then ended by his own premature death. His death unleashed decades of civil war as his generals tore his empire apart. The dream of a unified world died with him in Babylon. Yet his legacy was monumental. Though his empire shattered, his conquests had irrevocably changed the world, spreading Greek culture across a vast swath of the globe and creating a vibrant new civilization. The death of Alexander marked not an end, but the beginning of the Hellenistic world.